I work as a cybersecurity analyst for a large office company in my hometown. I'd just begun my first job in the sector, therefore I had to work the shift that no one else wanted to. Working overnight was not as bad as I had imagined. In fact, it was quite relaxing. My duty primarily consisted of reviewing log files to ensure that nothing suspicious occurred while the rest of the staff slept. This meant that I was usually alone in the office building for long hours. I'd fall asleep frequently since staring at a screen for hours on end in the middle of the night was taxing on my eyes, and with no one else to keep me company, keeping awake wasn't easy. I began setting quiet alarms on my phone for every hour to ensure that I did not sleep through my entire shift. I had been at this job for about 4 months when this happened, and I still work there today. It was a typical night, and my co-worker had just concluded his shift at 12 p.m. and left the building. A few minutes later, I got up and started the coffee machine before walking down the main corridor to see whether anyone else was still in the building. This was my usual habit, just to make myself more comfortable. I sat back down at my desk, got out my phone to set the alarms, and then resumed with my job. About 20 minutes later, I realized I hadn't heard the coffee machine beep that it was finished, so I went to check on it. I walked down the hall to the little coffee counter and discovered that there was no coffee in the pot, and that the entire coffee machine had been switched off. I thought it was strange, but that was about it, and I simply turned it back on and returned to my desk. As soon as I sat down, I realized my phone was not where I had put it on the desk. I checked my pockets and dashed back to the coffee station, but it was also missing. I recalled it, and I was certain I had set it exactly next to my keyboard on my desk. I started to freak out and glanced about furiously. My desk was placed up in the center of a large room with other desks and laptops. I felt watched as I stood in the middle, knowing that someone else had to be there with me. Nervously, I shouted out to my friend in a trembling voice, hoping it was simply him pulling a silly prank on me. I waited a few seconds, but there was no response. I stood behind my desk for a few seconds before hearing a gentle shuffling from behind the desk in the far corner. Almost immediately, my phone alarm chimed in the opposite corner of the room. My first reaction was that there were definitely 2 unknown individuals in the room with me, and I immediately began racing for the exit. I didn't hear any footsteps behind me as I walked out, but I wasn't taking any chances. I dashed across the street to a nearby petrol station and dialed 911 from their phone to report the strange people in our office building. The police arrived quicker than I expected and searched the building. They brought out a man after a few minutes, but I didn't recognize him. They also located my phone under some crates in the corner of the office. He was also spotted carrying a tiny knife in his pocket. The next day, we learned a lot more about what truly happened. Apparently, the man was a former employee who had been sacked shortly before I began working there. The man informed the cops he was attempting to terrify me in order to get me to leave the building so he could get his corporate laptop. At the very least, he claimed to have obtained the information he sought. It all seems unusual to me, and I'm not sure whether I trusted his reasons for breaking in, but my coworkers did mention that they recalled the guy, and he was clearly strange. I'm glad I got out of there when I did, because I'm not sure what would have happened if his plan hadn't worked and I'd stayed in the building. I work at a Montessori school, which is really a very small school with 3 or 4 smaller classrooms for children. Where I work, the classrooms are on the basement floor of a church, and my duty is to clean them every night after class. It would only take me about 2 hours to clean all of the rooms, but I also worked the closing shift at a neighboring grocery store, so I wouldn't get at school until around 10:30 p.m. most evenings. You should also know that the church shared a parking lot with an elderly care facility just across from it. I'll confess that a lot of strange and disturbing things have happened at this school, but the weirdest had to be what happened just a few weeks ago. I had just completed cleaning the second room and was starting to transfer all of my cleaning supplies to the third room. It was probably around 11:45 at this point, which meant I was running a little late, so I was rushing. As I traversed the corridor to the third floor, I could hear loud bells ringing throughout the church upstairs. Someone rang the doorbell. Nobody has ever turned up for any of my shifts previously because it was always so late, and both the school and the church had closed hours earlier. I was a little nervous, so I moved slowly up the stairs and approaching the door. It was a wooden door with large tinted glass windows. Trying not to be noticed, I glanced over the corner to see who was outside. I noticed an elderly woman, possibly in her 70s or 80s, standing just outside the entrance. I backed away before she could see me. I opted to ignore it, assuming she had simply wandered off and that one of the workers at the old people's home would pick her up. I resumed my cleaning, mopping the flooring of the room. But barely a few minutes later, I heard hammering echoing down the corridors. I jumped a little, then paused to listen. The banging paused for a few seconds, followed by the old lady yelling from outside. It was difficult to understand what she was saying, so I went back upstairs where I could plainly hear what she was asking for. She was calling for someone named Abby, and she kept repeating her name. As I approached the door, the woman paused. I peeked around the corner, and she was no longer outside the door. It was a little disconcerting, but I reminded myself that someone had probably come to get her after hearing her yell. I turned around and started my way back outside. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the old lady peering at me from the window beside the steps. She stared me in the eye and cried, "Abby, help me." Her eyes were wide open, and her hair was long and grey. I hurried back downstairs and locked myself in one of the classrooms. I pulled out my phone and contacted the old people's home next door, explaining the situation and asked if she had strayed away from them. The lady on the call informed me that everyone was present. They would have noticed if anyone had departed because they were obliged to check out. She stated that she would double check with security and wait on the queue just in case. While I was waiting, I heard a hammering on the upstairs window, and a few seconds later, the woman on the phone described the old lady's appearance and asked if it was her. I answered yes, noting that she continually yelling for someone named Abby. There was a brief moment of stillness. "Mom," I murmured softly into the phone. She responded by advising me not to approach her and to find somewhere safe to stay until someone could come out and collect her. Obviously, this only made me more afraid. I remained in the room, listening to the incessant beating on the window upstairs. Now, this building was quite ancient, and I had no idea how long those windows would last if she kept beating on them. I eventually heard male voices outside, and after what seemed like a battle, they fled. I sat there for a few minutes, just reflecting on what had transpired. Then I got up to finish cleaning the rooms. The entire event felt surreal, and the fact that the old lady is in the building across from me still makes me anxious. I never found out who Abby was or why the lady tried to enter the church, but I'm glad I didn't open the door.